Manhattan Crane Massacre. On March 15, 2008, at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, a crew began extending a 200-foot Favco tower crane at 303 East 51st Street in Manhattan's Turtle Bay neighborhood. Licensed crane rigger William Rapidi supervised an 8-person team performing a dangerous procedure called jumping, which raises a tower crane to reach higher floors during construction. The process required installing a 12,000-pound steel collar around the crane mast to anchor lateral support as the structure climbed toward the 18th floor. Rapidi made a catastrophic decision that violated manufacturer specifications, federal regulations, and basic safety standards. Instead of using the required 8 polyester slings to suspend the massive collar, he used only 4. Those 4 slings wrapped directly around sharp metal edges of the crane tower with no protective padding whatsoever. One sling already showed pre-existing damage, with visible cuts and severe discoloration that Rapidi failed to detect during inspection. All 4 slings used the weakest possible knot configuration called a choker. At 2:30, all 4 slings snapped from cutting against the sharp edges, combined with the pre-existing damage. The 12,000-pound collar slid down the mast and crashed into the 9th floor collar with catastrophic force. That impact dislodged the 2nd collar, which slid down and dislodged a 3rd collar at floor 3. The entire crane lost all lateral support and became fatally unstable. The 200-foot tower tipped violently and snapped at its base. The crane boom and operator cab catapulted over a nearby apartment building and landed on a townhouse on East 50th Street, completely demolishing the building and crushing 28-year-old Odin Torres inside. Crane operator Wayne Blydner, 51, died trapped in his cab. Rigging crew members Clifford Canzona, Brad Cohen, Santino Gallone, Anthony Mazza, and Aaron Stevens were killed. Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau indicted Rapidi on 7 counts of manslaughter, and the incident triggered immediate citywide crane safety reforms. Hard Rock collapse. On October 12, 2019, at approximately 9:12 in the morning, over 100 construction workers labored on an 18-story luxury hotel and condominium project at 1031 Canal Street in New Orleans' Central Business District. The Hard Rock Hotel New Orleans represented a controversial development on the site of a former Woolworth store that had sat vacant since the 1990s. Crews actively poured concrete on the upper floors while reinforcing steel structures throughout the rising building. The structural engineer had designed steel bolt connections for the lateral support system, but those connections proved inadequate for the loads being applied. The structure could no longer bear the combined weight of wet concrete and workers. The upper floors began collapsing inward and downward. The partial structural failure created a catastrophic debris field of concrete and twisted steel that covered multiple city blocks on the North Rampart Street side. Workers fled in panic as massive dust clouds engulfed the site. 3 men died from their injuries during the collapse. Anthony Magrette, 49, was recovered immediately after the collapse. Quinion Wimberly, 36, and Jose Ponce Areola, 63, remained trapped in the unstable rubble as crews placed tarps and barriers around the building. Their bodies remained visible in the wreckage for extended periods as the community walked past daily. The recovery became a prolonged nightmare for families. Wimberly's body was finally retrieved on August 7, 2020, 10 months after the collapse. Areola's body was recovered 9 days later on August 16th. OSHA found the structural engineer failed to adequately design the steel bolt connections, but a grand jury ultimately found insufficient evidence for criminal charges. Second crane disaster. On May 30th, 2008, only 76 days after the March Manhattan Crane Massacre, another tower crane catastrophically failed at East 91st Street and 1st Avenue on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The city remained under intense pressure to tighten crane safety after the first disaster. A massive tower crane was being used for 32-story condominium construction when a critical component called the bearing ring developed a stress crack. The bearing ring connected the tower to the turntable base and allowed the crane to rotate. The ring had been manufactured with a material defect or improper welding that inspectors failed to detect. The crane operated normally through the afternoon until approximately 2:30 when the bearing ring catastrophically failed. The ring separated from the turntable, and the crane tower lost all rotational support. The 200-foot tower snapped and severed from the base. The entire structure tilted violently and began falling. Witnesses reported seeing crane operator Donald Leo, 30 years old, visible in the cab as it twisted during the collapse. He appeared to brace for impact and pray. Leo died within 20 minutes from trauma sustained in the fall. Laborer Ramadan Kurtaj, 27, was working on a lower section when he saw the structure failing. He screamed warnings to coworkers to run and attempted to evacuate, but was struck by falling crane components. Paramedics transported him to the hospital, conscious, but with catastrophic internal injuries. He died during surgery, approximately 4 hours after the collapse. Investigation found the bearing ring had a pre-existing weld defect, and the civil lawsuit resulted in a record $96 million verdict. Port Arthur scaffold. On April 29, 2025, at 1:44 in the morning, a 5-person crew worked the overnight shift at extreme height on a liquefied natural gas construction project at the Port Arthur facility in Texas. The workers stood 65 to 85 feet above ground, performing formwork jumping for LNG tank construction. The process involved lifting a multi-layered climbing formwork system while the crew stood on the platform itself, then tying reinforcing steel and pouring concrete before repeating the process. The crew had successfully completed 8 formwork jumps earlier in the shift, and was attempting the 9th jump before shift change. The left side bracket of the platform rested on a bolt head instead of on the bolt shaft. This improper seating placed the bracket on the integrated washer rather than the proper anchoring point, making the platform unstable, though it appeared secure enough to initially hold the crew's weight. The crane operator lifted the formwork into position around 1:40. The crew gave approval to release the rigging cables. Once released, the bracket connection failed immediately. The formwork rotated violently as the left side dropped to a steep angle. 3 crew members, Reginald McGee, 41, Felipe Mendez, 25, and Felix Lopez Sr., 42, did not have their fall arrest lanyards attached to approved anchorage points. These 3 men fell 65 to 85 feet to their deaths. 2 crew members had properly attached their lanyards and survived with injuries. Bechtel Corporation's investigation identified 7 contributing factors and suspended all formwork jumping operations company-wide. Real quick, if you find this informative, I cover stories like these regularly. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see more. Now back to the video. Electrocution on lift. On February 25, 2025, at 8:30 in the morning, 2 workers operated an aerial boom lift on an affordable housing construction site at West Ogden Avenue and South Homan Avenue in Chicago's North Lawndale neighborhood. Francisco Javier Ruiz Reyes, 33, of Harvey, Illinois, and a 26-year-old co-worker were performing exterior work on the apartment building. Multiple electrical power lines crossed near the construction site with specific minimum safe distances required by OSHA regulations. The boom lift controls allowed extension in multiple directions as the workers maneuvered the platform basket. The boom extended upward as they positioned themselves for their task. They failed to maintain the required safe distance from overhead power lines. The metal boom came into contact with an overhead electrical power line, and the platform became energized immediately. Both workers suffered electrocution from contact with the energized platform. Francisco screamed for help as the electrical current surged through both men. Emergency services responded with firefighters and paramedics working to extricate the workers from the energized platform. Both men were transported to Mount Sinai Hospital on Chicago's west side. The 26-year-old worker survived and was treated and released. Francisco Javier Ruiz Reyes died from severe electrical injuries. The Cook County Medical Examiner ruled the death accidental due to electrocution from aerial lift contact with electrical wires. Maryland Trench Burial. On February 28, 2025, at 11:30 in the morning, 2 workers dug a trench along the base of a centuries-old brick and stone retaining wall on Academy Lane in Catonsville, Baltimore County, Maryland. Emerson Amestica, 24, and Wilmer Barzalo, 32, had been hired to reinforce the outside retaining wall of a residential home. The wall stood approximately 10 to 12 feet tall and had been weakening over decades. The workers excavated a trench approximately 6 feet deep with no protective trench box, no shoring, no sloping, and no protective systems despite OSHA requirements. The digging destabilized the already weakened wall at its foundation. The homeowner was inside on a phone call when a worker shouted a warning. The homeowner heard something about the house falling down. The brick and stone retaining wall collapsed suddenly into the trench. Both workers were buried completely under tons of masonry debris. The homeowner immediately called 911, and Baltimore County Fire Department rescue teams responded. Rescue teams assessed the dangerous situation with trench walls remaining unstable. Teams used a calculated method to carefully remove rubble while bringing shoring equipment to reinforce the trench walls. The rescue operation lasted approximately 8 hours, from 11:30 to around 7 in the evening. Both workers were recovered and pronounced dead at the scene. This incident marked the 5th and 6th trench deaths in Maryland in the first 2 months of 2025. Taguig scaffolding collapse. On February 4, 2015, at 8:10 in the morning, workers workers poured concrete on an early morning shift at the Suites luxury condominium construction project at 1 Bonifacio High Street in Bonifacio Global City, Taguig City, Metro Manila, Philippines. The high-end residential development used temporary steel scaffolding and formwork to support multiple floors under construction. Workers stood on the floor being poured, while others worked on lower levels underneath the structure. The concrete slab in its advanced pouring stage rested on supporting iron bar scaffolding. A safety failure cascade initiated suddenly. The scaffolding supports gave way first, and the loss of scaffolding support caused the concrete floor slab to lose its bearing capacity. The concrete slab collapsed downward onto workers positioned on the lower levels. Renan de la Cruz was working on the upper ground floor when the collapse occurred. Falling concrete and metal debris struck him, and co-workers rushed him to St. Luke's Global Hospital, where he was declared dead on arrival. Ruben Racriquim was crushed under concrete slabs and metal scaffolding and became pinned under the debris. Rescue teams began a 5-hour operation to free Racriquim from the wreckage. His body was finally recovered at 1:35 in the afternoon. 11 other workers suffered injuries, including fractures and crush injuries. The Taguig City government ordered the entire construction site shut down pending investigation. Arizona Trench Burial. On July 28, 2025, at approximately 1 in the afternoon, Ronald Andrew Becerra Jr., 44, worked in a trench approximately 6 feet deep as part of a Southwest gas utility infrastructure project near Citrus Road and Lower Buckeye Road in Goodyear, Arizona. The father of 3 children devoted his free time to his kids, described by family as a man whose hobby was his children. His partner Melissa Prado was the mother of 2 of his children. Multiple natural gas lines ran underground in the vicinity as excavation continued in the hot Arizona sun. Soil conditions began deteriorating, and water suddenly started spraying up into the trench. The saturated soil lost structural integrity rapidly. The trench walls began collapsing inward, and Becerra became trapped underneath the soil collapse. A co-worker called 911, and Goodyear Fire Department rescue teams responded. Deputy Chief Gonzalez assessed the scene and determined conditions created an almost impossible rescue scenario. Rescue teams stated more dirt kept collapsing in. Crews worked carefully near the natural gas lines, afraid any spark could cause ignition. The rescue operation transitioned from rescue to recovery. The multi-hour operation continued through the evening and into the night. Becerra's body was recovered at 2 in the morning on July 29th. Approximately 13 hours after the initial collapse. He was pronounced dead from crush injuries. If this was informative, consider subscribing so you don't miss future content. Thanks for watching.